It always starts with the shoes, doesn't it? It started with the sound of Penelope's heels. Penelope, the self-appointed queen of the Anchor's Landing Homeowners Association, her heels hitting the planks of the main pier, a sound like a tiny aggressive woodpecker declaring war on my quiet Saturday morning. I was sitting on the deck of my trawler, the Current, watching the sun just start to burn off the mist rising from the cove, sipping coffee that tasted like a slice of pure, uncomplicated peace when I saw her coming. And I knew. Instantly I was the target. She was a sight to behold, honestly. Hair shellacked into an impenetrable helmet, crisp cotton blouse that looked expensive and highly judgmental, and she was already holding her phone, not taking a picture, but in that classic, accusatory video recording position, like she was documenting a crime against humanity. Before it even happened, her gait was less a walk and more a furious, perfectly choreographed march, a performance she'd definitely practiced in the hallway mirror, and before she even crossed my slip line, she'd shrilled across the water that my boat, the Current, was a visual blight on the community. I just took another slow sip of my coffee, feeling a familiar sort of detached pity, wondering how someone manages to weaponize pearls and turn beige deck chairs into an existential threat. She stopped maybe 4 feet away, close enough that I could smell the expensive, highly synthetic scent of her hairspray. And she immediately launched into this perfectly memorized recital of, I swear, HOA bylaw number 17, subsection C, which apparently covered the inappropriate length of a mooring line or the moral failing of visible fishing gear. I glanced around the marina, honestly one of the most serene spots in the entire county, heard the gentle creak of the pilings, the distant peaceful cry of a gull, and thought how utterly absurd it was that she could turn this beautiful, saltwater haven into a courtroom in 60 seconds flat. Her voice ratcheted up. Sting grievances, noise violations. My engine hadn't turned over in a week. Imaginary oil slicks. I have the most modern, eco-certified system in the county. And my unsightly deck chairs, which I can confirm, are a perfectly inoffensive shade of coastal off-beige. I politely pointed out these facts, but logic is merely speed bump in Penelope's righteous crusade. And she just talked louder, convinced she was being broadcast live to an audience of adoring rule followers. Then came the climax of her initial tirade, the smug, clear, cold threat. She was filing a formal report today, and people like me didn't belong here, and I'd be gone from her Marina before sunset. That possessive, arrogant little phrase, her Marina, it almost made me laugh out loud, a deep, satisfied rumble in my chest that I quickly suppressed. I just nodded, let her savor the victory she thought she'd just secured, watched her click, click, click her way back up the dock, satisfied she'd set the day's drama in motion. Because what Penelope didn't know, what she had zero clue about, was that while she was busy pulling out the little hammer to tap at the rules, she wasn't just talking about a slip I rented, or a small slice of property I happened to live on. She was talking about the entire thing. The docks, the slips, the land, the cafe, the rusted crab traps, the whole beautiful, frustrating, complicated operation. I owned it. And sometimes, you know, the only thing better than winning quickly is watching the other person walk confidently right into the checkmate you've already laid out on the board. By mid-morning, the sleepy marina had turned into a low-grade buzzing hive of anxiety, not from tourists, but because Penelope had officially begun her rounds. She looked like a maritime dictator with a clipboard, scribbling notes on everything from faded sailboat paint to a cooler left open near the bait shack. I watched her lecture a couple of teenagers about the social responsibility of appropriate dock footwear. The woman was truly relentless, and I figured she was getting paid per complaint, or at least running for some kind of self-important dock queen title. From my vantage point, I could hear fragments drifting over the water. Property values, liability exposure, community standards. Words that sound significant, until you realize they're being weaponized. Against a simple fishing net drying on a railing, the thing about people like Penelope is that their entire identity is based on the conviction that everyone else is wrong, and they alone possess the moral fortitude to fix it. That works great on people who are just trying to avoid a headache, but I'd been in the property game a long, long time. I knew the machinery behind Anchor's Landing. I knew which slips were leased, which were owned outright, which contracts had grandfathered in loopholes you could sail a tanker through, and most importantly, I knew exactly how long her self-righteous crusade had, until it backfired the moment she crossed the wrong, legally defined boundary. That boundary came into view right around noon. I was sanding a bit of teak trim on my aft deck when she came back, this time sporting a grin that suggested she'd just uncovered a national security scandal. She announced loudly that she'd filed her report with the HOA board and demanded to know my violations. She rattled off a list that had grown impressively ridiculous: the boat size, the awning, the now infamous unattended coffee mug, and finished by informing me the board was meeting that evening to vote on my removal. The way she delivered it, you'd think she was announcing a public execution schedule. She didn't know that my friend, Tom, one of the 3 board members, was already on my side, mostly because I'd let him store his antique yacht in my private, secure dock during hurricane season last year, a favor he definitely owed me. She didn't know that the HOA had precisely 0 legal authority over about 40% of the slips in the Marina, and she really didn't know that my slip, 14B, was one of them, protected by a specific, irrevocable lease agreement that predated the current HOA charter by a decade. But why ruin her day? I watched her click off again, enjoying the rhythmic sound of her confidence. Around the docks, other boat owners gave me those sympathetic, wary looks. Everyone at Anchor's Landing had a Penelope story, you know? She'd reported a retired couple for a decorative potted plant, fined a young family for hanging a wetsuit to dry, and threatened to impound a kid's kayak because the orange didn't match the coastal palette. Most people just rolled over to avoid the incessant high-pitched conflict. I had 0 intention of doing that. The next morning, the Marina had that brittle, quiet atmosphere, the air before a thunderstorm, when even the gulls seemed to be keeping their distance. I wanted to see her next move, and I didn't have to wait long. I spotted Penelope through the window of the little glass-front HOA office, talking to the board president with hand gestures that suggested she was describing a high-speed police chase, not a dispute over a beige chair. Every few seconds, she'd glare out at my boat, clearly hoping I'd spontaneously burst into some incriminating activity just to strengthen her case. I stayed put, leaning on my rail, looking as relaxed as a man who owns the building he's in, because nothing unsettles a tyrant more than indifference. Then Gus, the greasy, half-bagel-eating boat mechanic who'd been at Anchor's Landing longer than the actual concrete docks, shuffled by. Gus's network of gossip was faster and more reliable than the Marina Wi-Fi, and he gave me the lowdown. Penelope had filed a formal complaint not only with the HOA but with the county maritime office, alleging my boat was out of compliance with harbor safety regulations. When I asked which specific regulation, Gus just smirked, saying she'd listed so many, it looked like she'd just read the county code book and picked every chapter with the word vessel in it. The county involvement was the key. She wasn't just relying on the flimsy HOA rules. She was desperately trying to get an actual authority figure to push me out before the board could even vote. That told me 2 things. First, she was terrified the HOA was too weak, and second, she had no idea that Anchor's Landing sat right on the boundary of 2 different authority zones, and one of those zones fell completely under my private control. The ripple effect of her campaign was immediate. 2 boat owners stopped by to warn me she was claiming my engine leaked fuel, an absurd, provably false claim, and another mentioned she was criticizing the very color of my hull, as if white was somehow a threat to property values. She was trying to create a narrative of manufactured outrage, stacking small, petty details so that when the showdown happened, she'd have a crowd of people nodding along with her. A good counterattack, though, isn't about hitting back immediately. It's about choosing the moment when your opponent is overextended and absolutely certain of their victory. So I spent the morning tightening lines, checking the forecast, and making a few quiet phone calls, one to the county clerk I've known for years, another to the harbor master's office, just reminding them that certain property records and lease agreements were about to come into play. I didn't give them the full story, just enough to prepare the stage. Around noon, she made her next big move, She came striding down the dock again, clipboard in hand, flanked by Tom and another reluctant board member. She announced they were conducting a preliminary visual inspection ahead of the county's arrival. I asked them calmly, politely, if they had the legal authority to board my vessel without consent. They hesitated, of course, and Penelope jumped in, citing an HOA rule that supposedly gave them full access. I asked her to show me the bylaw, and I watched her face tighten, just a fraction, as she frantically flipped through her clipboard and couldn't find the necessary text. Tom muttered that it was just a courtesy check, and they left. But not before Penelope loudly announced the county inspector would confirm everything soon enough. I just let them stare, keeping my face as neutral as a stone wall while in my head, I was counting down the hours until this whole dramatic show backfired into a glorious dumpster fire. The rest of the week was a strange mix of normal Marina life and high tension. Kids fishing, the smell of fish tacos from the dockside cafe, but beneath it all, an awareness that a miniature war was being fought between Penelope's luxury condo and Slip 14B. As evening fell, the special board meeting was all anyone talked about. Penelope strutted past with a fresh stack of printed grievances, ready to deliver her performance. The conference room above the office was packed with curious onlookers. Penelope sat near the front, her papers perfectly stacked, her voice easily carrying over the hum of the air conditioner as she launched her presentation. Charts, photos, a list of complaints ranging from my boat being an eyesore to my outdoor lights potentially confusing marine wildlife. I sat in the back, arms folded, letting her spin her case, letting the board members nod out of politeness or fear. The one thing she couldn't stand more than resistance was indifference. When she finished, sitting down with a palpable air of triumph, the board president cleared his throat and announced they'd review the matter once the county report arrived. That was my cue. I leaned forward just enough for her to catch my eye and gave her a smile. Not a mocking smile, but one that said, "The game has just started, and you've already missed the most important piece." 2 days later, the county inspector arrived. The morning was overcast, the kind of heavy, dull gray that makes the water look like metal. Perfect mood lighting for the confrontation. Penelope was already waiting, dressed like she was chairing a shareholder meeting, holding a folder that looked capable of stopping bullets. She launched into her HOA representative introduction, but the inspector politely declined her invitation to join his inspection. She followed him down the dock anyway, calling out unsolicited background about my supposed violations. He ignored her, asked my permission to board, and began his methodical review. I let him work, answering clearly, providing every single piece of documentation he requested, including the most important document in the entire stack, the copy of my slip lease agreement. This lease, pre-HOA, irrevocably stated my slip's independence from their authority. I watched Penelope's eyes narrow when she saw the document exchange hands, utterly furious that she couldn't read its contents. After an hour, the inspector thanked me, said he'd file his report, and when Penelope pounced, asking if he'd found serious non-compliance, he replied in a tone so flat, it might as well have been carved from stone that the report would be sent to the proper channels. The whispers in the marina picked up again, but the crucial shift happened on Thursday. The county inspector's report arrived at the HOA office. I was in the marina store when it was delivered, and the clerk, who absolutely detested Penelope, casually mentioned it was marked, "No action required" on the front page. The power balance had instantly flipped. All her claims, engine leaks, safety hazards, illegal modifications, all of it, officially baseless. But I didn't let the news spread. I waited. The special compliance review she'd scheduled for Saturday would be the perfect stage. Saturday came, and the review drew a huge crowd. Half of them there to watch Penelope fall on her face, the other half just morbidly curious. She ran through her accusations again, her confidence now forced, adding bizarre new ones like possible disturbance to migratory birds. I let her finish, then stood when the board president asked if I had anything to say. The silence that fell was heavy. The first thing I did was calmly walk over to the board and hand a copy of the county's report to each member, pointing directly to the "no action required" conclusion. A ripple went through the room, and I saw the blood drain from Penelope's face. That was the first crack in her armor. The evidence was gone. The second came when I calmly explained that my slip lease, predating the current charter, placed me outside the HOA's direct authority on almost every matter she had cited. Tom and the other board members confirmed it from their own records. Her jurisdiction was gone. And then I walked up to the table and slid a single crisp sheet of paper across the polished surface towards the president. I didn't say a word. I just watched as the president read the header. Deed and ownership records, Anchors Landing Marina. He looked up at me, then back at the document, and finally to the signature line at the bottom. The final checkmate. The silence in the room was electric. The president just stared, cleared his throat, and said, "It appears, Mr. Hayes is the legal owner of the docks, slips, and majority of the facilities here at Anchors Landing." The gasp that went through the crowd was visceral. Penelope did not take the news with grace. She shot up, instantly screaming about a conflict of interest and illegal manipulation. But the words felt hollow. She was simply a private citizen yelling at her landlord. Within the hour, the board, already humiliated and tired of her drama, voted unanimously to remove her from the governing committee. But Penelope's pride, I quickly learned, was not something that allowed for quiet defeat. The next morning she was back on the docks, not with a clipboard, but with a wild energy, cornering anyone who would listen and spinning a frantic conspiracy theory. I had bribed the county inspector. The harbor master was my cousin. I had threatened her with financial ruin. The truth had never been the fuel for her crusade, only the momentum of conflict. The problem was, people were no longer nodding along. They were listening politely, then walking away, clearly more interested in avoiding her than joining her side. Her desperation became palpable. She filed yet another ludicrous county complaint, this time alleging that my ownership was an illegal monopoly, a claim the county clerk found so amusing he called me directly to confirm its immediate dismissal. But her reckless flailing at official channels finally had a consequence. The more she poked at authority, the more she invited scrutiny on herself. I had been quietly feeding information about her past to the right ears, and it wasn't long before a county investigator took interest in her history as a treasurer for a previous HOA in another neighborhood, a position she'd resigned from abruptly after a disputed budget. Audit 2 days later, the real blow landed. The harbor master called to tell me the county had issued a formal notice to Penelope. She was under official investigation for potential misuse of HOA funds during her previous tenure. The news traveled through the marina faster than a fresh squall line. I didn't spread the news myself. It didn't need my help. But when I walked past her slip later that night, I saw her sitting alone in the cockpit of her boat, staring out at the dark water as if trying to figure out where her war had gone wrong. The following day, I made my final move, not out of spite, but to close the chapter. I called a marina-wide meeting, not for defense, but for a presentation on future plans. When everyone gathered, I stood and outlined a series of serious upgrades: dock repairs, expanded storage, community events, emphasizing that Anchors Landing was a place for cooperation and peace, not personal vendettas. The reception was overwhelmingly positive. The applause wasn't just for the plans. It was a collective release from the tension Penelope had been feeding for months. She stood at the back of the crowd, arms crossed, face unreadable, and when the meeting broke up, she left without speaking to a soul. By midweek, she began the process of moving her boat. It was a slow, awkward affair, made worse by the fact she had to coordinate with the same staff she had spent months antagonizing. A few people offered terse goodbyes, but most just watched from a distance as she packed her belongings. The air felt lighter with every box carried off the dock, like the marina itself was exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. On the morning she finally motored out, the water was still, the sky was bright, and I stood at my slip sipping coffee. She didn't look my way, but I caught a glimpse of her profile. Stiff, proud, yet definitely tinged with something that might have been regret, or maybe just the confusion of a checkmate she never saw coming. When she disappeared past the breakwater, the sudden quiet was startling. Life at Anchors Landing returned to its old, easy rhythm almost instantly. Gus stopped by one afternoon with a beer and a grin, telling me it was the first week in months he hadn't had someone report him for leaving a wrench on a railing. It's those small things, the absence of constant surveillance and accusation, that remind you just how much a single, toxic presence can change an atmosphere, and how quickly that atmosphere can heal once the toxin is removed. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw a party. My satisfaction came from the fact that I never had to raise my voice or match her theatrics. I just let the truth, backed by documentation, do its work. But in the quiet moments, I realized the months of conflict had done something unexpected. It had clarified loyalties. The community here was closer now, more united, forced together by a shared threat. And as for me, I had learned the ultimate lesson of ownership. It's not a weapon to dominate others. It's a responsibility to protect the spirit of the community you hold the deed to. I had fought not just to keep my slip, but to preserve this rare kind of life where neighbors watch out for each other. And the biggest disputes are over borrowed tools or whose turn it is to buy the next round at the bar. Now the water is calm, the docks are steady, and the only clicking on the planks comes from the boots of fishermen heading out at dawn, not the heels of someone marching toward another manufactured crisis. And that, in the end, is all the victory I need. But I have to ask you, the viewer, was I right to keep my ownership a secret until the very last moment, letting Penelope publicly humiliate herself and others? Or should I have simply told her I owned the place on that first morning, stopping the drama before it ever started? Sometimes I wonder if I allowed the chaos to play out just to teach her, and the whole community, a permanent lesson in humility and power. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment below. Tell me your own HOA story, and hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more tales of waterfront drama and unexpected victories.